January 17th, 2020. First up is public comment and announcements. Anybody? Okay, hearing none. We'll move on. Minutes for the December 5th meeting.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes from the December 5th meeting.
Okay, it's been moved. You're a little late, but you can vote. All right, since we're on Skype with you, we're going to have to do this by polling.
Roll call vote.
Yep.
Yeah.
So-
Aye, yes.
Jude?
Aye.
Larry?
Affirmative, yes.
Okay, aye. So it's unanimous. Next up is the primary focus of the meeting. I'm going to turn this over to Andrea to introduce our guests.
Yes, so this afternoon, we get to have Jennifer Goldson and Avery Wolf from JM Goldson Preservation and Planning. This is a firm that's been active in the community development space for several years. They've worked with a lot of Cape Cod towns, most recently with Brewster and Provincetown, and they responded to a request for solicitations that the town of Harwich put out to put together an action plan for the trust. And so tonight is the kickoff meeting where the trust is going to be solidifying a process to move forward with an action plan. An action plan is a document that towns can produce to provide strategic guidance in their housing initiatives for this action plan particularly.
And I'm just going to jump in before we start with you folks. Why would this matter, you ask yourselves? Well, it not only matters to us in a management vein because we need to know with the resources we have what everything enjoys as a priority ultimately. And there needs to be a roadmap for that so that everybody knows how it works. But more importantly, we're at the junction now where we put a request in for the CPC, which got halved last night, in part over the issue of us not having a plan. It's really important that we have something that's tangible, that the public buys into, and that we all understand that this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. With that, I'll turn it over.
Excuse me, Don, one moment. I think I just said Brewster because I saw Donna's face. But I didn't
I
mean
think we knew
Brewster.
where we were sitting.
I meant Provincetown and Eastham.
Thank you. Yeah, for our other work that we've done. We also did work in Brewster, which is why I didn't correct you. We were a sub-consultant to Barrett Planning Group when they did the housing production plan a couple years ago now. So you weren't wrong.
Right.
I'm Jen Goldson. This is Avery Wolf, and we're from my firm. We're called JM Goldson. I've been doing this work now as a small business owner for over 13 years. But before that, I was a municipal planner, and I worked for the town of Brookline and the city of Newton. And I really started this practice focusing on the Community Preservation Act. And one of the first things one of my first clients said to me was, we know how to spend our CPA funds in open space and historic preservation and recreation, but we don't really know what to do with the housing piece of our funding. And we're really struggling with this. There was a trust that was just adopted in our community, and we don't know if we should trust the trust, and we don't know if we should give our CPA funds to this trust. And so that was within a few months of opening my practice, that was one of the first questions my client asked me. Before I started the practice, in the city of Newton, I was managing their Community Preservation Act program. And I realized the city of Newton is a very different scale, a different place than a community on the Cape. But it gave me a real opportunity when CPA first came around to really understand kind of the ins and outs. But more than that, we spent time in Newton really testing the CPA in a lot of ways. And some of the things we did went to court and had the effect of changing the law. And so we were really at the very beginning when I was in Newton of CPA. So I come to the housing work with a little bit of a different path than perhaps other consultants you've worked with who work in housing. I came up through historic preservation into the Community Preservation Act, and then really into housing from there. And so when I work with trusts, I really like to look at that, how all those pieces fit together, And the relationship with the Community Preservation Committee and the CPA funds is usually the primary funding source for many trusts across the state, is very important in terms of having your own credibility, understanding what you want to do with the funding, how much funding do you even need, and how do you justify those requests. And so by doing this planning process, we feel that you'll get all the answers, not only you're hoping for, but that the Community Preservation Committee is looking for, but to really, even as your membership changes, over the next number of years, they'll have a plan put in place that's flexible enough that you can seize opportunities as they come that may not have been anticipated, but gives guidance around how to make decisions about what are the priorities and how much funding do you need each year to really support those priorities. So those are our primary goals in working with you. Avery's going to run down a bit of the proposed schedule, and we want you to know that this really is just a draft. And so if you feel like, well, something feels too fast to me, or if you feel like the timing won't really work with this because of something else going on in the community, please let us know, and you can take some time to think about it. You don't need to let us know today, but we thought we'd run through the scope and the schedule today, and then you can give us feedback either now or later. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So I actually want to reverse a little bit. Since this is our first time meeting you guys, it would be really great if you could just kind of give a little brief introduction, who you are, why being on the board is important to you, just so that we can kind of start to get a sense of you guys. That would be really helpful, and then we can dive into the schedule.
Larry, you want to start this off?
Sure. My name is Larry Brophy. I've been city planner since, 30, 40 years. I was a planner for the Redevelopment Authority in Boston for 20 years, and I was a planner at Northeastern University for 10 more years, and I kept myself relatively busy with housing and institutions. And I've got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in planning. And I was a member of AICP and Canadian Institute of Planners for 20 or 30 years till I gave up paying dues.
Great, nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Judith?
I'm Judith Underwood, and I've lived in Harwich full-time 20 years now. Single mom with 2 kids, have been a recipient of CPC funds. My roof through that. So I've seen the client side as well as the community side. I'm a water commissioner here in Harwich, and I also serve on the Housing Authority. And I'd love to see Harwich develop slowly and steadily and make sure that all parts of our community are served.
Brendan?
Thank you.
My name is Brendan Lowney. I'm a resident here in Harwich. I'm also on the Historic Commission. My background is in construction for the last 20 years. I'm a project manager for a local company, and having 80 carpenters underneath us, there's definitely a need for housing in the Cape. A lot of our guys are traveling off Cape right now, from Carver, Plymouth, just to even work in P-Town. So there's definitely a need for affordable housing, so I have a passion for that. I also did some work when I was at Northeastern with the BRA and developing in the mid-90s a lot of the affordable housing that surrounds Northeastern, so working with the community as well.
Before we go on, Larry, I'm not sure what's going on, but
Yeah,
if you could mute the sound coming in unless you want to talk.
Yeah, that's me. I just put him up so he can speak. So.
Okay. And I'm Don Howell, selectman also. Since the mid-1990s, I've been involved with affordable housing, primarily through HESH, Harwich Ecumenical Council, at the time for the homeless, and now it's housing. I was, as a selectman in the early 2000s, I was involved with creating the housing committee, and I served for 4 years on the planning board in the earlier 90s. So we're all here pretty much dedicated to getting affordable housing built and having people move in.
Great. Thank you. Do you guys want to do quick intros too?
I'm Charlene, I'm the town planner.
That was
Thanks.
quick.
And is never retiring.
Yes, I am in 5 months and I think 16 days.
Approximately.
No one's counted.
And I'm Andrea Aldana, and I'm part of the housing coordinator team that's contracted with the town from the Community Development Partnership.
Thanks. All right, so I'll just walk through this draft schedule with you guys. I hope you all have it in front of you. Larry, I know that you don't have it in front of you, but we'll send it along digitally soon so that you can see it as well. So going from left to right on, basically that first item is today's meeting. And then over the next few weeks, I've already started doing a bit of this. We'll be reviewing background materials, past planning initiatives, and other documents that kind of identify goals and needs around housing in the community. And that's one thing that would be helpful if there are specific studies or planning projects that have happened in the past that you think would be really good for us to look at. It would be great to get your input on that and recommendations. And then in February, which all of these meetings we'll want to make sure that we pin down dates at some point. We can do that at a later time. But sometime in February we'll have a meeting with you guys, and at that meeting we'll bring a draft summary of that background research that we're doing, and we can talk about that and start to think about the needs and goals for you guys over the next 5 years. Again, in March, we'll start doing some visionary interviews. We'll send out like a survey to stakeholders. Again, it'll be good to get a sense from you guys who you think we should ask for input from. And that, again, will be around draft goals and potential initiatives for the trust. And we'll review that at the March meeting. And then April will be really about community engagement. We'll do a public workshop and focus groups with stakeholders. Again, it'll be great for you guys to help us identify who to include in those focus groups. And from those engagement opportunities, we will come up with strategies to support the initiatives and start to draft a plan outline, which we can discuss at the April meeting. And then the May meeting will be, going further with that outline and starting to draft the plan, discussing that at that meeting, and then coming up with any revisions. And we'll give you time to give in-depth comments and also just talk about it as a group. And then the last few months are just revising and meeting again to go back over the plan and make sure that it's buttoned up, including a budget for you guys for the next 5 years. So if you have any questions or recommendations based on this, I would love to hear them. No? All right.
Well,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'm pretty sure it's going to be part of your presentation, but at some point in time, I think the public would like to know how you can arrive at the priorities, who the stakeholders are, and how you're going to reach out to them.
Yeah, so the reason we start with an understanding of your housing needs and past planning initiatives is because we think you already know what your housing needs are, essentially. And so we want to start all of our engaging with community members with a strong understanding of what you already know. And in the visionary interviews, what we'd like to do is come up with a list at our next meeting with you around who would be the stakeholders that you think would provide us with the most information, but also the most perhaps diverse view about housing needs and priorities. And they may or may not agree with what the official documents say, but we'd like to get a sense of the community through those. It's a little bit, it gives us a peek into what we may see at the public forum, and it actually helps us design the public forum in a way that recognizes the variety of perspectives in the community, so it helps the public forum be a bit smarter if we do the stakeholder interviews first. And from the public forum, that really is geared for any community member who's interested. We wouldn't necessarily narrow down, but we'd certainly want to encourage some participation from advocates and even from opponents and people that will have an opinion one way or another on what the housing trust funds should be used for. we like to involve the Community Preservation Committee members as early and often as possible. That's just an example of one of the stakeholders, but I know it's an important stakeholder for the trust. And so we would, it's really more up to you than us, but we would recommend that even as early as the visionary interviews, that you give us at least some of the CPC members to speak with there, and then encourage their participation as well at the forum. And the focus groups are something that we like to run in addition to a public forum. And the focus groups are something that, we typically say 8 to 10 people would be invited to each focus group. We would have them, it would not be an open public meeting like the public forum or like all of these meetings are. It would just be us in a room with 8 to 10 stakeholders who don't all sit on a board together. And we would really be just having a very frank discussion about how they think the funds should best be used. Roughly what types of projects would they feel would be supported? What opportunities do they see? We often bring a map of the community and really talk through specifics around project ideas and things that they see as priorities. So that's a group of, it could be, there's some overlap here, certainly. Some of the visionary interviews may also be some of the people you want us to speak with at these focus groups. And then by the time we do all of this, we feel we have a pretty good handle on what stakeholders and the folks who participated at the community workshop feel should be priorities. We have a good handle on what the planning analyses have already said are your priorities. And through our work with you, we would sort of test what we're hearing with you all at each meeting and basically give you a briefing of, this is what we've learned so far. What do you think of this? What do you think that indicates? Are there things that we're missing? And then by the time in April and May that we start to really prepare an outline of the plan, we really look to all of that feedback that we've gotten, as well as the initial background research and all of the feedback we've gotten from you, to put together a draft that we feel is representative of what we've heard and is also strategic in terms of how much funding do we think is realistic for you to even ask for, perhaps. What kind of uses would give you the most bang for your buck if that's what you're looking for. Sometimes people are looking for a different set of criteria, like we want to do low-hanging fruit that's going to have a lot of community support, even if it costs a lot per unit. Other communities tell us, well, the cost per unit is more important to us than having something that's easy and low-hanging fruit. So we really want to be strategic in finding a way to utilize the least amount of funds for the most amount of reward, the most amount of units, for example, or the deepest need, serving our deepest need, or being really strategic about, you'd mentioned, I want to see it sort of spread around, the efforts kind of spread around in the community. So looking at it from that perspective. So there's all different lenses. We'll find out what's really important is we have lots of ideas that are almost irrelevant to you all because we're not community members. But we'll offer ideas to sort of test them out. Just like I listed a bunch of things just in the past couple minutes, those are things we've heard other communities tell us are important to them. And they're very different things. So you can take this plan and prioritize lots of different ideas through using different criteria, and different priorities will then raise to the top. So that's how we work. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it was more Socratic than it was a question. I want to make sure that everyone who's watching this in the public, who could conceivably be seeing this through YouTube, understands that the word priorities is meant to establish a framework for things. It's not like we're trying to predetermine whether developer A's got a better project than developer B in our estimation. It's to have a template to be able to test these things against and say, great plan, we don't have the resources for it because that would be like the fourth priority in this listed plan. And we're trying to develop the criteria that we'd evaluate things. So the public understands that's what we're trying to arrive at.
Right, well said.
Yeah. All right, so unless there's any other questions, and like I said, we can follow up offline about specifics of scheduling meeting dates and everything. And if you have any other questions, you can absolutely reach out to us. But we did want to do one little activity with you guys.
Before you go on, can I
yeah.
just make sure that you understand that sitting behind you is the chair of the Housing Committee and the chair of Real Estate and Open Space.
Great.
So you have two stakeholders here right
Awesome,
now.
thank you. Yeah.
And a member of the CPC is here too.
Yes.
I
Hi, Don.
see.
So yeah,
He
we
was a
will.
neighbor.
We want to do a little activity with you, and just basically we're asking you what are your hopes for this project, and what do you see any challenges that might come up throughout the process?
You want me to go first? Or Larry, you wanna?
No, you go ahead first.
Oh, yeah, put me on top. So I would like to see, I'm very keen on everybody that wants to be able to speak, get that opportunity. Sometimes that means scheduling meetings at different times, especially community stakeholders that might have two jobs, kids, elderly parents, you know. So if there's some flexibility with that, and maybe something to think about, I'm not suggesting it, but some kind of electronic dialogue. I don't know if that's been used previously. Like a Post-it, but electronic. As a water commissioner, I very much want people to understand that what's going on under the ground is really significant, especially here on the Cape, with what happens above the ground. And we need to protect that water supply while we serve the community. Because if we don't have the water supply, it really doesn't matter. We can't live here, right? So.
Thank you.
Yes.
Larry, you want next, or?
No, go ahead.
I mean, for me, it's just, you know, it's all about the plan and more of an open discussion during the meetings, which is what we've been talking about, having a period in the meeting where we just talk about all the options, whether it's working with the developer or a buy-down program. What are all of the options? Get them all on the table. So when someone does come forward, we can look at their plan and see if it, you know, if it meets the criteria we're looking for. So I think that's important. Hopes are to, you know, affordable housing for everyone. You know, I think the forums are very helpful. You know, we have a challenge where our meetings are during the day, but I think the forums at night, we did have one time, and it was really great. We had 45 people show up. So I would like to see that happen again as well.
You can't get to pass again, Larry.
Yeah, Larry, you're up.
You're up.
Yeah, I would probably echo.
Do you want to turn them
Brendan, that I'd like to see a priority and probably a batting order of the recommended schedule. And I think you should give everybody an opportunity to speak. Am I still coming through?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, give everybody an opportunity to speak, because it's probably more important to sell it to the general public than it is to sell it to everyone else. They have to be on board with us, and the more we get out in public and explain that, the better off we are. And I think we also need a wide range of options for housing, right from heavily subsidized housing, right through the full range of anybody that working on Cape Cod. We don't really have to create too many more McMansions. So it's just a range of options and priorities, and put them all on paper so we can have batting order and see who's on first.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Mine actually builds off of Larry's. I'm more elemental here. It was a real gift that the state passed legislation to allow for trusts. You can jump on things quickly that you would have had to wait for town meeting actions. But with that gift carries a responsibility that you have the public along with you. The natural dynamic of a town meeting would have required the public to be with you. If we're going to continue to do this and receive the resources to do this, we got to make it really clear to the public. It's tempting to say we've had that conversation with them, but it's kind of like, you know, Christmas time. They tell the story of Christmas every Christmas. You could say, well, I heard that last year. Why should this matter to the general public has to be a major point of discussion whenever we're having a discussion about housing. My particular passion, and I've not tried to hide it throughout the entire time, is that the trust provides an opportunity for us to be able to do 40B projects that would also include non-capital A affordable housing, where you could have a combination of affordable housing that would meet the state criteria, but also low-end workforce housing that's just above that line that's absolutely needed. And to get to that point, I think you've heard a variant of all that in this committee so far. To get to that point, we need many voices talking towards the same direction. We need the housing, and here's how we're going to do it. It's very transparent. We got a roadmap. And my biggest worry for the last year and a half was, if you have 5 competing projects and you approve 4 of them and the 5th one is a like project, how do you rationalize why you told that last person no when you told the other 4 yes? There has to be some sort of criteria where we can point to them and say, it's because the community helped develop this plan, we own this plan, and this is the plan.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So the next meeting, we were hoping to schedule for February. And what we'd like to do is talk about housing needs and priorities, what we've learned from our research. But what I'd also like to do is give you a Housing Trust 101 presentation, which you all don't necessarily need. But I think since you're recording these, that it might be a helpful platform to really teach about what's eligible, what are all, you know, Larry was saying it'd be great to have a list of what are all the things that are eligible to do, what are the restraints that we have to, you know, be aware of and comply with, and how does this all work. And what I can do is give you that Housing Trust 101 presentation, and it's great that you have this all set up here, so I can see that it would be very easy to do that at the next meeting if you. The only thing I'd want to request, though, is if it would be possible, I know you have a full agenda today, but I don't know if it would be possible to carve out roughly an hour of time. And I don't know if that means that we need to meet in a separate meeting than your normal meeting, or earlier or go later, and I don't want to be greedy and ask for too much time, given that there's lots of people who seem to want to see you today at least. But I think that would be most useful to have a really substantive discussion along with the presentation.
I think I could speak for all of us. We've been bouncing around like a ping pong ball for the last year and a half. I think it would be useful to have a larger agenda item that has a focus that we could build on, as opposed to how many different action items can we cram into an agenda. So personally, I think that would be a perfect thing to do in our regular meeting.
Great, thank you.
And is there a date already set for that meeting?
February 20th.
20th.
February 20th? That's at 2, though, isn't it?
Yes, at 2 o'clock.
Okay, so I may need to talk with Don and Andrea offline, because I think, I didn't look at my calendar, but I'm pretty sure that's school vacation week.
It is, actually.
So my family will not be around that week, unfortunately, so I don't want to throw off your regular schedule, but we don't need to decide that right this moment.
The Cape is a vacation paradise. You could
Yeah, I could just-
vacation here.
In February, too, it's so
February?
desirable to come. All right, but we don't need to make that decision now. And that's really, I think, everything that we were hoping to cover
Yeah.
as an introductory. Was there anything else you wanted to ask us or talk about?
Judith?
Something that's come up in some discussions is, and maybe it's not a municipal action, maybe it's more a state action, but are there legislative initiatives or some kind of policy initiatives where the towns, I don't know how to articulate this, that there's some way that more power can be brought for the town so that it's not just a lot of McMansions being built.
Oh, I see.
I don't
So
know.
you're seeing a lot of tear downs and McMansion and larger
Yeah.
homes replacing smaller homes?
And it's just that the market is so rapidly
Right.
changing, and are there any mechanisms that have been used around the country
Some
to
communities have had
moderate that?
success with looking at how their zoning dimensional requirements and also site plan review requirements and their demolition delay ordinance. I don't know if any of these are historic homes, but there are certainly zoning mechanisms that, in a trust, even though this would be a bit, I would say, traditionally outside of the trust purview,
Yeah.
clearly you're interested in all housing, naturally affordable housing. And oftentimes the trust can also act as a policy group. And I know you also have affordable housing committee? Who's here? Yeah. So they would traditionally more be the policy entity that would, kind of weigh in and help with that kind of policy. But a trust, there's certainly overlapping roles because they both care about the same
Support each
things,
other.
basically, yeah. There are some communities who have very strong controls, who've had a market where that's happening a lot. I know that Wellesley has, in the past few years, amended their large house review and site plan review, and I think that it's working well. But just as a, aside, it's not really part of this specific planning effort, but I'd be happy to just follow up with Wellesley and see how their new, amended zoning is going and seeing if they think it's working, and I'd be happy to share that if you're interested.
I'd appreciate that.
To follow on what Judith said, part of the challenge here isn't just the size of the house. Part of what's going on is a dynamic where we're having tear downs of houses to make them McMansions, and the use pattern changes to
That's true, too.
like 60 days, 90 days. Non-resident taxpayers, Harwich right now has a little bit more than 50% of its tax base coming from non-resident taxpayers. However, that mix over the last 20 years has changed from people who might have rented their houses out during the course of a year because they were more modest upper middle class and middle class houses, to places that are shut down, have property managers, and nobody touches them until I come back. So that's part of the problem is we're replacing not just with size, but with use, something different that's squeezing people out of the market to be able to live here.
Or alternatively, they're becoming Airbnb, nightly hotels, which,
ironically is not an allowable use in the town of Harwich.
What's not an allowable use?
Airbnb.
Short-term rental.
Or boarding houses.
No, actually they are in different places with different permits. One of the other things is, if I might, is we really need to, and we've already started looking at where we do and don't allow multifamily and the outrageous criteria that's on the books for multifamily. You need a minimum of 10 acres, but you can't have more than 25, and you're only allowed 1 unit per, 4 bedrooms per acre, and it's like that's more restrictive than Title V. So that needs to be looked at and adjusted significantly. So that's something the planning board's already starting to look at,
Okay.
but it won't happen for this town meeting, but hopefully for the next town meeting.
They're already considering. Do you have 2 town meetings a year or just one?
Right now, just one.
Okay.
Larry, you have anything?
I'm still there, I can hear everything, I just can't see anything.
Oh.
Is that metaphoric or
angle must be-
reality?
I can see you, Larry.
Angle might be off.
Yeah, tell them to stop making faces, because we can see him.
We see you, Larry.
One thing that we like to do at the outset of a project like this is we like to just do a quick survey monkey to you all and anyone else you think that we should It's not a big community survey, it's just we want to get a sense from you all, and if there are any other key stakeholders or town officials or board or committee members that you want to weigh in, but it's similar to what we asked you today about hopes and challenges, but we just want to just pick your brain a little bit more about ideas that I'm sure you've already been thinking about what you hope will be in this plan, and maybe you have some ideas that you want us to test or keep in mind or kind of get more feedback on. So it's just a way of us getting some ideas and sort of understanding where you're coming from now. So it's like a kind of a general survey. It'll be mostly open-ended questions because we're not having to analyze hundreds and, answers. It's probably a matter of 10 or 12 or maybe up to 20 people that will answer it. And we don't even really summarize it. It's just for you to tell us what you're hoping we will take into consideration. And it's a way that you can basically communicate with us in a really kind of fast, effective way. And there's some level of anonymity too, if you'd like us to set it up that way. So we often do that, and then you can also send the link around to other key stakeholders who you think should weigh in at this very early stage. And if that's okay with you, we could set that up probably in the next week or so. Does that sound okay?
One thing I want to caution everybody about, because you can't be all things to all people. I mean, we've got you here for a particular purpose, but there's another priority that we need to address, which is certain things are only possible if other committees make them possible, like the planning board, housing committee, and that kind of priority is where we get together and brainstorm about possibilities. Our lives would be easier if you could do this in your area. We have not done that at all, really. We've sat in this room. I think we're going to have our first meeting with the housing committee shortly, but that would be the first meeting with the housing committee. We've not yet met with anyone from the ZBA, anyone from the, well, we have the planner here, but the planning board. So if there's anything that we might need to be able to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish, we don't have a roadmap for that. I'm just putting it out there.
Well, something that could come out of the action plan can be how you operate and how you communicate and how you coordinate, not just how you spend your money and how much money do you need. Sometimes we will help communities figure out if there are, I'll give you an example. In one community, they felt like their policy work was very important because they didn't actually have another committee that was doing that kind of work. So they ended up creating a number of, they were a bigger committee too, but they ended up creating a number of subcommittees. One was focused on policy. They also had a policy as to how they operate, that they want to hold some kind of I think they might have called it a forum, but it was meant to get all of those entities together every year to discuss issues. And I'm not suggesting that that's what you need to do, but even though this plan won't deal specifically with zoning changes or the things that the planning board's looking at, I think it's important that the people in the community who sit on these boards and commissions like you all care about certain things that are maybe not directly related to your core mission, but are tangentially related. And so if there's a way that we can suggest and put in a structure in place where you can have regular coordination or some kind of a framework to have those discussions with the boards and commissions who are doing that work, then I think it's something to think about that could be in the plan.
Anybody have anything else?
Thanks.
Okay, we're heading
So
in the
we're
right
gonna be
direction.
Observing through the rest of the meeting, and then I think we're going to drive around a little and see some sights with Dawn afterwards.
Buy souvenirs.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving along. Where are we here? Sisson Road presentation. Laura, you're up.
And I did send this document to Larry electronically. I don't know if he can open it. He usually can't open anything I send him.
I think it's okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
Hello. Just introduce myself again. Laura Schufelt, Assistant Director of Community Assistance for MHP. And with me today is Mark Wickstead from Bowler Engineering. As we had set out and given the trust an award for technical assistance. It included a grant for some due diligence on some of the parcels that you acquired at the last town meeting, I believe. So we are on our second one, which is Sisson Road. And I kind of want to give a little bit of background about where we started and so what some of the assumptions.
Even before that, because there's,
Yes.
there's a commercial developer doing something else on Sisson Road.
Okay.
So
So this
Sisson
is-
Road where?
This is 265 Sisson Road, which is,
Chloe's Path.
No, I know that, but people generally refer to both of them as
it's at
Sisson
the
Road.
other end. This is 265 Sisson Road, which is where the Harwich Junior Theater is, the same site. And just to give a little background, because I worked on this a number of years ago when I was at Falmouth Housing Authority and working with Bob Murray, we looked at the site, and actually an RFP went out from the town on the site, and it never progressed. But we were able to get, somebody found, maybe it was Don somebody found some of the old proposals that were submitted. And so we kind of started with a site plan that had been the one that had been chosen the last time, which had 16 units of housing on it. The Harwich Junior Theater stays where it is. It has a lease. My understanding, if I'm remembering correctly, is that the lease is pretty much just the building itself. The lease doesn't include their parking, although the site plan that went forward in the RFP made it mandatory that they have their own parking, that be part of what they kept, and the housing was another piece. So that's the starting point. We started with the site plan that they had, and then we asked Bowler Engineering to take a look at due diligence. One thing that was not on the plan was a septic system. There's an existing septic system, but they hadn't put on a septic system for the housing they were proposing, and so we wanted to see, well, geez, can it fit there? You know, we don't know that. We want to see that, and we want to see, look at soils, and I'll let Mark walk you through the what they looked at and the conclusions that they made. I just wanted to set the table of this is where we came from, and you know, we're not locked into the number of units of that site visit, site plan. We just wanted a starting point for them to work on, and then come back to you and say, okay, now what are your priorities with this? This is what we know based on this. Okay, fair? All right. Mark, you want to?
Okay. I don't know if you've seen the plans. They're in that package, if you want to orient yourself. So on Sisson Road, this is between Parallel Street and Forest Street, is another way to describe it, if people are unsure where we're talking about. So our memo, pretty typical due diligence memo. We look at the site, the layout of the buildings. We had good plans from before, as Laura mentioned, so we didn't do a lot of planning of the buildings. We tried to focus on the septic and utilities and that sort of thing. We did look at zoning, so there's a zoning summary in here, and as was stated before, the minimum requirements for multifamily are pretty drastic. So if this were a conventional development, it would require special permits, variances, and so forth. So we're considering this as obviously a 40B project to make that plan work. We evaluated resource areas near the site before looking at the septic system, just to see if there were any setbacks, water protection areas. I think there's a DEP considered wetland that's 300 feet from the property, which is far enough away, and then there's a wellhead protection area that's much farther away. So it's not in or very close to a wellhead or well protection area. So the other utilities, water is in the street. There's town water in the street. It's in actually all the streets, Parallel Forest and Sisson Road, so we didn't see there was any issues there. Focusing on septic, the system for the existing theater was installed in 1990. It's a conventional system of the time. It's a single leach pit, I guess concrete structure, which was more typical back then, and a septic tank. That's it. And then there were some changes made to an additional pipe put in at a later date, but just conventional system built in 1990.
Is that a Title V elements?
That predates Title V, I believe. I think Title V was 95.
It was that transition period where they were
Yep.
building Title V element systems that were more than,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Title V light, I guess, or I'd call it, but it's pretty close to what would have been required after Title V came in.
but since it's not Title V, it would have to be upgraded to Title V, wouldn't it?
It would have to be inspected. If it still meets the criteria, it's okay. It doesn't have to meet Title V, as I would understand it. I mean, the only triggers, I think, would be property transfer or expansion of that building. So I guess, not jumping ahead, but we considered two options of leaving that system separate with the theater and a system that's just for the residences, or one combined system. So, not knowing exactly how this would go and what the lease requirements would be and how the different entities might operate it, we just went ahead and did two versions, just not knowing, just to see if both would fit. Or
Well, that's what I'm
not.
driving at. If this were a combined septic system, that wouldn't get you anywhere. As a combined project, you'd have to do two. The project itself would require its own septic.
If the existing system were inspected and it was okay, I think it could stay. And then you would build maybe perhaps a slightly smaller system for the residences, or you would just put in one system for the whole property. I think either is viable, obviously depending on the condition of the existing system. It may make more sense to just put in one system and
Yeah.
abandon a system that was, it's 30 years old. But we did both because it wasn't that much of an effort. So we considered, as Laura said, 16 bedrooms. That's got a flow of 1760 gallons per day. And then we assumed, wasn't quite sure what to consider the use of the other building. We just called it an office at 1,000 square feet, or 75 gallons per day per square feet. So the total of the whole site would be just over 2,000 gallons per day. So that would be a pressure dosing system laid out as we showed on the plans with a reserve. And then on the plans, we also assume that we would install a infiltration system for stormwater as well. We wanted to make sure that that would fit on the site and have proper setbacks to the septic system as well, and to the abutting properties. I would say to the east, we don't have a complete topographic plan here, but we know that the grades are relatively flat across the site. They slope generally from Sisson Road to the east, about 4 feet or so, 6 feet, and then there is a slope off property to the east. So we looked at breakout there too, to make sure that wasn't a problem. We're able to set back from the property line far enough that I don't think that would be an issue, and fit a reserve system in there as well. So I think everything, feasibly can fit within the site. Depending on where you want to place things, I think there's enough room for everything on the site. I think that kind of covers the layout of the septic system. And we used, we did pull the records from the system that was installed in 1990. So we had a little, some soil information, groundwater information there, so that That indicated that there was no groundwater within at least 12 feet of the surface, so that was good to find out.
So I think based on this report, we can move ahead with talking about how you would want to move forward in putting a request for proposals together, if that's what you want to do, looking at number of units, and composition of units, so that we can get some kind of goals together, what you're looking for the site. And also then think about what other kind of, if we know how we want to have, conceptually, how the site is going to lay out, then we may want to do a little bit of soil sampling, just to make sure that what they found before, we don't have to do that. It's kind of a next step, that there's quite a bit of information already there. But I think but may be required just to look for whether the septic and drainage systems actually have the.
Yeah, I mean, it would be required for
would-
design eventually,
it
so
would
you
be-
could just do it now.
Yeah.
As long as you know where you're going to put the system
Right.
reasonably.
The site isn't,
It's not that
there's not a
large.
lot you can do with the site. You can either have the buildings on the road that's historically kind of compliant or complementary to what's there, or you can put them in the back and put the parking in the front, which, aesthetically is a different kind of thing. So those are the conversations that I think we need to have next to start drafting an RFP. And also find out if it's, balance that all the time with what's financially feasible. Can a developer do this? Honestly, 16 units is not a good number for financing affordable housing, because it's too small for some funding and it's too big for some other funding. So, but we can talk about that, whether, whether that's something that the trust wants to augment besides just providing the land. Would you want to, then put money in to make it work at 16 is probably maxing it out unless you go up. And so, that's the other thing. These are two-story buildings. Is that where you want to be?
It's been 6 months, so I'm going to reiterate something that was said before. There was a follow-on plan at the time that no one's been able to lay their hands on, which had 2 quads as an alternate to the 16 units.
The 2 quads that are in South Harwich. Yeah. I know, I think I know where they are, I just can't get to them.
I've said that too. But nonetheless, we don't have the plans.
Right, we don't have the.
But that was actually planned out for that, because there was that problem of it's too big to be small and too small to be big.
Right, right. And that would be very doable. So we can, obviously you can think about that, and maybe that makes the traffic flow a little better as well. And less parking.
How much parking is on here now? Is it
24?
Parking?
How many, is it?
I think
We
there's
had
24.
26 spaces for the residences and 11 for the theaters, for a total of 37.
Okay.
We did have them separated somewhat.
How much for the theater?
11.
Is that,
Just so you know, in the summertime, when the Junior Theater uses that as their rehearsal space for the backup show for the next opening. And there are many times where there's like 15, 20 cars there. The whole place is maxed out.
But they do, right now, their only lease is for that building.
And there is parking at Brooks Academy and off a parallel street as well. That's not utilized except when Brooks Academy is in session.
I get all that, but when
Yeah.
somebody's used to using something in a
I
certain way,
understand.
there's a shock to them when
Sure.
they find out that, you're really only eligible for 10 spots here.
Yeah. And it may be that you think about, leasing them entrance and parking that they would be using exclusively.
Okay, good.
Can I ask a question? Just in your experience, is there a preferable number of units that you could see that the funding would be easier to get to faster or easier? If, I mean, in this size of a,
There's funding rounds once a year.
okay,
So under 20 units has kind of a special funding round, a special funding source, and their own application schedule. It's usually in March. And so
so it doesn't, as long as it's under 20, it's in that
it's in that,
bucket or
if they want that source of
Okay.
funding. You can go into the
the larger bucket?
larger bucket, but then you're waiting years and years. The smaller bucket is usually, is not as overprescribed as some of the others, so that it's quicker than if you were going for tax credits or some of the other larger subsidies.
I think Judith's point, what she was driving at is, we were hoping for that one project that we can use to show people we can do this.
Yeah, just
So
to-
she's looking at doability.
Yeah, it's, so, 10 units, 12 units, 8 units is a good number for that funding source, because it's a per unit maximum, but then there's also a per project maximum. So if you go too much more than 12, you're reducing how much you can get per unit. And
Okay.
so,
But it sounds like you're saying that we can do this.
I think you can.
So the next step is we
Time-wise,
got to get
yeah.
on the agenda again to start talking reality about how we're going to do it. RFP, that kind of thing.
Right. So and let me just say that I think you can do it I think a developer can do it.
Yeah.
I think would be much difficult if it was a municipal project because, or trust, you being a municipal entity, because you're subject to public construction laws, so you're increasing the cost of the construction. You're decreasing the attractiveness for a developer because they not only have to follow all the rules, but they also, there's filed sub-bids, and so general contractor has to work with subcontractors they may not ever work with before. So it increases the costs about 30%, and you can't make that up in subsidy, because there's just not enough subsidy to make that 30% up. So it's very difficult. And then who's gonna own it and who's gonna manage it? And everything you do as a municipal entity has to be procured. So you'd have to procure a management company, and then any repairs or maintenance has to be paid for with prevailing wages. So there's an and that adds to cost, not just on the development side.
Just to be clear, I don't think anybody at this table was thinking that we were going to be building it, but just to be clear, in the 80s, Harwich had a Harwich CDC, which built stuff, but Harwich itself, as a municipality, has done this many
Right. And that's a good thing.
developments.
It's good to have, to be able to put out a request for proposal and get a developer in and doing it. Put in the request for proposals the kinds of things that you want to see. You can't be real prescriptive, you can't have control over the development, or it flips it to a public project. But you want to have enough in there so that your priorities are there. You give a developer enough room to be creative, but you have parameters so that you don't have a 5-story building or something. You need to put height limits and all those kinds of things without saying we want this design only.
And before anybody out in TV land starts thinking, wait a second, Don's got to be bipolar. We're talking about slowing down and coming up with a plan, but we're talking about building something without a plan. This was always, something like this was always the priority for us to get our arms around so that we could prove that we can do something.
Right.
When you're likely to have this coming more to fruition, their plan is likely to be done.
That's,
so that we're allowed to pick up and move forward with generally how do we operate.
right, and you already have the land. You already have the land. So, you're, and, you know, we have been prioritizing which land we were gonna start with. And right now, until we put more parameters on what you wanna see here, right now, the land may be enough. So then you may not be contributing funds to this. It's a priority for you to get development done. And so, but you may not be a funder except for the land.
Judith?
A couple of questions. And it's more about procedure and whether or not we can do something. Could, so you're thinking that we could possibly even put in for funds this March, or it's too late in the year? Or too,
Oh,
not enough time?
yeah, no, you'd have to have a developer on board and they would be going
Okay,
to,
so that's not a possibility
That's not a
this
possible
March?
this March, no.
Okay. Can we, I would request that we get the old septic tested, because I think before we put out something, if we put out something, that's going to be a question, I would think, for the developer, if they want to even carry the septic of the, if a whole system has to be put in, the old one to come out, and one shared system, I think that's gonna impact the developer's choices considerably, because that's still a public building, the theater building.
it's
In other words,
privately, the building is owned by the Harwich Junior Theater.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
It's
They
not.
lease it.
They lease
It's
it.
owned by the
From us.
town.
it's owned by
Oh,
the
okay.
town,
Okay,
and a developer may or may not want to take, long-term, the control of that septic could be a challenge, and it would just be nice to know that before we.
You don't have to join the septic systems, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but the junior theater has its own system.
But I was just saying, can we get it tested just to make sure it's sound?
But I don't think the junior theater septic system really has anything to do with the development of these units.
So we don't need to,
System.
in other words, we can just.
That would be part of the development process, where they'd have to
Oh,
determine
okay.
what their
Yeah,
expenses
thank
are.
you.
Do
Yeah,
that now.
because
Okay.
I don't think it's even gonna
It's not
trigger
one or
that
the
it be
other.
tested.
Okay.
Because they're
Yeah, I think-
separate entities, they're separate.
I wasn't sure how this might work going
Yeah.
forward. Like, is there going to be a lease line, and is there going to be an area for a future reserve system for the theater? And then, so that would be
That I don't-
totally separate. I figured a developer would prefer them to be separate, which is one
Yeah,
reason I did it
exactly.
separate, but
Yeah,
I
that's what
wasn't
bring it
really
up.
sure how it would be operated.
Yeah. Okay.
And if I might, frankly, that's something that I think somebody higher than you guys, or a different entity, hint, hint, Board of Selectmen, would have to decide, because the building is under their jurisdiction.
Yeah.
It's now being leased to the Harwich Junior Theater, but, I mean, if that system ever fails, they're gonna have to figure out a way to get a new septic system in there to service the theater.
But the housing piece could go forward in planning without worrying about that septic, in other words?
I believe so.
I
Or
think
is
so.
that a health department question? I don't know.
I mean,
The
just,
leasehold never gave them the opportunity to control the whole property. It was the building that they were leased. I'm not even sure that they were formally given the parking spaces.
They
They've been
weren't.
informally using them.
it's my understanding they're leasing just the building.
Yep.
That's my understanding as well.
So who, if I could just ask this, who owns the property?
The town.
The town, yeah.
Board of Selectmen have control over it, but
So my
then that,
question would be, if we were to do something with the developer, we're not dividing the property. So would this be a lease to the developer?
It would be a 99-year
99
leasehold.
years.
and then
Okay.
lease. So when, sorry, I'm just kind of backing up,
oh, go ahead.
with ownership of the land, because at the town meeting, you were given control of the land or given the, I don't understand.
Oh,
The town has
trust
always
itself.
old it. It used to be the
Yes.
recreation building.
It
It's
didn't
Right.
get transferred.
Yeah.
It's
to
under
the
whose
trust, right?
jurisdiction within the town that you're talking about?
But,
We own it, but there's a current,
but you, as the trust, don't own it. The town still owns it.
Right.
You just have control of it.
Oh, wait a minute.
No, the
Did it-
jurisdiction was conveyed to us, but absent the building that's already there, because that's a lease.
That's
There's
right.
there's
The
an
land is
obligation.
now under the trust jurisdiction.
So therefore, the lease.
Oh,
owns
in the
ownership.
physical building of,
The lease one?
The trust is an independent board who can own property. So what I'm asking is, does the town still own it, or does the trust own it?
I guess
Did
the
the title
trust
get
owns the land and the town owns the building. I would,
I'm not saying for sure because I don't know what paperwork went forward to transfer,
If it transferred.
if
That's,
it transferred, yeah.
I
okay.
can guarantee you one thing, the lease was never modified to say that there was a different owner of the property.
I'm, yeah,
I
I'm
think
just trying to think
conversation
who
needs
has
to
to
be
have, who has jurisdiction to approve
We may
things.
need to look into that
Yeah.
We'll have
first.
that answer next time.
Yeah,
good
okay,
question.
okay.
Good,
Because
good thing to
be
know.
different jurisdictions
Sure.
at different approval processes. So,
'Cause it was my understanding that since the building was there, that the building itself was still owned by the town, leased to somebody else under that jurisdiction, but the underlying land got transferred to the trust.
We'll get
Okay,
it,
well,
we'll get it solid.
we'll
The
figure it
lease
out.
was never modified, I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Okay.
wasn't.
Okay, so I think, questions, any other questions for Mark or I, or?
Can we get you back in here for a part two, practical discussion
We
about?
have a practical discussion and maybe, of course, we all have presentations that, training presentations. I have a,
Bring your own thumb drive.
I have a, I have a, putting together an RFP. And I'm working, hopefully by the next time we meet, I'll have a template, what questions you have to ask and what should be involved. So I'll have a template RFP, I hope by the next time. If not, we'll just work with what I have. But this is what I do all the time, so.
So that's agenda item 2 for those people counting.
Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Don. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay. Oak Street. They're deferring to me because it's not good news. I talked with Griffin, the town engineer, and this is just not on the horizon right now because there's just so many competing things that are backed up in terms of procurements. He knows that we would like it to be on his radar. I spoke to him earlier in the week about it, and Joe, the acting town administrator, so that it's in the queue, but there isn't any prospect that that's going to be in the next month or so. Any comments?
No.
Okay. All right, a discussion regarding Chloe's Path, which I understand is its own road off of Sisson Road. But the reason this is here, actually, is because this keeps percolating up as a discussion. And this was part of the dynamic where we chose not to make any priorities amongst potentially existing commercial projects a number of meetings ago. Here's your problem. Any developer, because we've got our own land, as you've just heard from the last presentation, that we're considering doing. We're engaging in setting up a plan for how to prioritize what comes in front of us, which would mean it's not a question whether Chloe's Path's development is the neatest thing since buttered toast. It's not a question of that. It's a question of it's way premature to have a discussion about in any way that we might participate in that project because we're not prepared to do that yet. So much as it would be, like I said, it might be a very commendable project that he might want to engage our help with, but we don't have a mechanism yet to even determine how we're going to disperse our assets, and before that discussion has happened, we can't have this discussion. That's the whole reason it's on the agenda, just so everybody knows publicly that we're not trying to do something in private that nobody knows about, because we don't even know that we're going to be involved with anything yet. When it comes to the point where we have a mechanism set up where we know how we're going to assess projects and what enjoys what priority and how much in the way of assets that we've got, then this will be on the agenda to have a discussion about does that fit in. But in the meantime, just to put everything to bed, I don't know that we can do much more than be the bully pulpit to help a private developer do something as a 40B project, but in terms of us partnering right now, it's way premature.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
perhaps we could table it until we have further information.
Yeah, no, actually, there wasn't any action design here because it doesn't have a vote or venue sort listed. It's just there so that the public would know, because I keep hearing things about there's a developer in so-and-so part of Harwich that wants your help with such and such. You're hearing it from this trust right here in a meeting. We're not considering anything like that until we have a plan.
Okay.
Okay.
But we're also not looking to discourage the
No.
current owner or developer to come forward. with
Absolutely
any
not.
ideas.
And we might be able to help them in terms of, you know, like, as I said, we could be a bully pulpit with the ZBA and helping them out. But in terms of liquid assets and being able to pour some money into it, we're not in that position right now. That being said, I'm going to ask about money. the next agenda item. Holy Trinity Church, we sent out the 2 letters.
So I have to recuse myself
Okay.
on this one. Okay.
Brendan's recusing himself. Don't go anywhere, Larry.
No, I'm not.
Logistically, you have a problem.
We can't vote.
Yeah, we may have to have you here out of necessity, rule of
Because
necessity.
right now, you don't technically have a quorum because
He
Larry
can't be
doesn't
used to
count
create a
towards
quorum. And I do have an ask, and you may have to participate if you could divulge what your potential conflict is. You may have to exercise.
Can we get the,
Okay.
the-
No, he's not available at all.
he's not in his office? No,
No.
he's not.
He's not available
Okay.
at all.
All right, let's put this back on the agenda because I'll publicly disclose what this would have been because I want to be able to have this discussion. We're at the point now where we sent out the 2 letters. They're on a demolition delay, which is good. We need to know, in an engineering sense, what that building really is like in terms of its integrity, and approximately how much a house lifting company would charge us to take it somewhere and plop it down. Because anything that we could possibly do here would be predicated on both of those things.
Does the church, does the diocese have any reports they might be able to share with us? Have you asked, have we requested?
Don't look at me,
I don't know.
The problem is when you're talking about a tear down,
I'm just
anything that
wondering if-
anybody who owns the property could possibly say will lead you to say, here, I'll help you tear it down. It's in miserable shape. They're not going to say it's great.
And I'm
Would they
wondering
not
if
have had
they
to
formally have
don't
any
do a
engineering.
report to historic?
They don't have to do anything about that on a demo delay. If they want to do a tear down on a property owner,
What's our timeline as far as,
We
is
have
it
a
on
year.
delayed?
we have a year.
Oh, so then can we table this until
Oh, yeah.
town administrator's back? So
We don't
that,
have to table it, we can bring it back.
but we can't vote.
We cannot vote, but that's what I'm looking for, my ask would be to allow us to expend X number of dollars, which I'll find out, to ask an engineering firm to just look at it as if it was a home inspection, and then to have, take a run. I don't want to even go, you've heard me say this in different ways about different things on this committee.
Sure.
I don't want to go off on my own without a vote of this trust.
Right, but we
So
can't do
I
a
would
vote today, so.
No, yeah, but
Right.
the vote I'm looking for is to empower me to go to a house lifting company and see, what.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when when it's brought back, that's what I'm looking for, that and for home inspection.
Sure. And it's money well spent.
It would be, and I'm pretty sure I can make that point,
So
but
we'll
we
put
can't
that on
vote
the
on it
next-
right
Well,
now.
let's do it, let's put it on the next agenda,
Okay,
okay?
number 3.
Okay, that's fine with me.
Otherwise, you've got to come back here, Larry, to the cold.
Oh, don't worry, it's just a 3-hour flight.
The next item on the agenda is not exactly the same as agenda building, and I don't want to hear from Larry that his report is that he was out sunbathing earlier today and had to come in for this meeting. But what is your report, Larry? You have anything?
What is what?
We have a section for member reports, just to let everybody know what you've been up to between meetings, if it pertains to us.
I really have nothing to report. I've talked to a couple of people about Holy Trinity Church, the electrician that worked on it, and a few other things. But outside of that, no specific items to report, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, you're just being modest. Thank you for drafting those letters that I signed.
You're more than welcome. You did a good job.
Judith?
I have nothing for today.
Brendan?
Same.
Okay. We're still going to keep it as a standing item, because it's useful. Housing Coordinator Report. Andrea?
Okay, so on the trust fund report, I believe you are still working on getting a formal process with the finance director to have those reports on a regular basis. Do we have an update on balances as of
Now,
today?
Carol's comment to me, she's been tied up in trying to work on the budget for this year, but what it's going to show is that we spent minimal money. That it's almost everything that we've collected is still sitting there. But she'll quantify that when she gets to it. That's where Joe is right now, is meeting with her over the budget, so she's been really tied up. Sorry.
No, that's okay, and I'm actually gonna kick it back to you for the next one, the update on joint meeting with the Affordable Housing Committee.
Art. I've kind of semi-dropped the ball because there's a lot of things going on, but can you suggest several dates?
You might have provided some dates to Belinda, but she couldn't be here today.
Well, pardon me, I don't have any specific dates, but evenings, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday.
Can we make a Tuesday evening? Okay.
As long as it's
Planner can't be there on Tuesdays, but you don't need me.
No, this is just, I mean, we're obligated under the,
I know, I'm just saying,
I got,
as long as it's not the
the
same.
bylaw that
evening as-
created the trust obligates
authority.
us to meet yearly with the Housing Committee to have this joint discussion of needs and,
So that's the only parameters I have that was communicated to me by my committee, that evenings, before 5 o'clock, it's basically out. I will never get a quorum.
all right, it's going to be a Tuesday. Let's make it
Okay.
6:30. So can you make sure Belinda sends out potential dates so that we can vote?
Yeah, in January or February?
It's probably going to be either the last week of January or the first couple of weeks in February.
Yeah, I think the last Tuesday in January is the Housing Authority, so I couldn't participate.
Let's shoot for the first 2 weeks of February and send out
Okay,
an
thank you.
invitation.
Okay.
Thanks, Art. Back to Andrea.
Yeah. Okay, so Belinda, my colleague, has been working with Caleb on revising the Pine Oaks video that you all saw several months ago. You, at that time, you had offered some revisions, and those revisions have been made. The video is actually ready for you to view again. However, Caleb is not here today, and so the video is not loaded up. So we're gonna table this for the next meeting. But then there'll be a second version for you to critique.
Did you add in music and,
I have not seen it, actually.
oh, you haven't seen it either, okay, cool.
I want to say something that's almost as exciting as watching paint dry, but it's got to be said because we've flung this around a few times. It is more than a term of art saying tabling. Tabling in the government actually requires you to vote to table, and then you have to vote to take it off the table again. So pretty much all the time we've been using that word, we're really saying, why don't we just put this back on another agenda and we'll take some action then.
Yes, thank you for that. So I'll push it to the February agenda. And then, just a little update, this was more of a reminder, because the packet obviously went out before this training took place, but the Lower Cape Housing Institute did hold a training last night. Art was there. The training was called Zoning for Housing to Protect Open Space, and it was presented by Judy Barrett, who is a really well-renowned housing specialist and community development professional who's worked all over the state. We also had her here in Harwich a year ago to do the Chapter 40B training, which we've talked about before. If the trust is interested, I'd be happy to pass along the slides from the presentation She offered some, I think 4 or 5 examples of tools that have helped balance open space needs and housing needs. And I think one of the main takeaways was that the open space community is really good about meeting their goals, right? Identifying space that needs to be preserved and preserving it. And that the housing space has something to learn from that approach. And that it's really important to preserve open space and spaces that we all know you shouldn't develop on. But then at the same time, you also need to be very clear and decide where housing should go. That it's not just about deciding where development does not go, but deciding where it should go and being equally as intentional about that. So if there's interest, I'd be happy to pass those materials along. Any questions about that?
No, but we did tangentially have that discussion about 6 or 7 months ago when we were talking about, what was it, Earl Road?
Deacon's Folly.
No, Earl Road. No, I'm not talking about that.
Oh, well, that would have been a perfect example
people-
of what we're talking about.
Yeah, oh, no, I get that, but the reason I'm using by Nantucket Sound is a lot of people get beguiled by the fact that there's a stand of trees on like an 1.5 acre lot or a 2 acre lot and confuse that for being an open space that they had bought themselves into. The reality was if it wasn't going to be us building something there, then their property rights, say if somebody else owned that property, they could tear down all those trees and build something. So we've got to be able to make a better case about you protect what should be protected and you build on what should be built on. And generally the criteria for our open space people is unfragmented space, which would be useful to indigenous species rather than just the lot across the street from me's always had trees on it.
On the Harwich Post Institute Town Wrap-Up, we are looking into dates to reschedule this wrap-up. So just as a reminder, the Post Institute Town Wrap-Up is a session, it's a professionally facilitated session that's offered through the Lower Cape Housing Institute for municipal officials, and this year we did open it up at the discretion of town captains, and Charlene is your town captain for Harwich. So those conversations have been happening across the Lower Cape for the past 2 months, and they've actually been really fruitful and fascinating, frankly. We only have 2 towns left, which are Harwich and Provincetown. And the date that we're looking at right now that seems to be floating to the top is the morning of the 27th of January, which is that a Monday?
Monday.
Which is a Monday morning. So as soon as we nail that down, I'll be sure to let you all know, and of course, we would love to have you there. Yeah, is there anything else you want me to say about that, Charlene? What do you want to add to?
Nope.
Okay. Some things that have come out of other town wrap-ups are towns that have decided that they want to move forward with hiring a housing coordinator, for example, so they're working on an RFP. In Truro, they are working on a 40B project right now, and there's some challenges that are arising during the public hearing process, and so they have organized a task force to handle communications to make sure that misinformation is being corrected in a timely manner. There are other examples, but it's a really effective and efficient space where towns are able to create some alignment across committees that don't normally get to talk to each other. So look out for that invitation as well. And then as usual, your December monthly report is in your packet. I'm happy to answer questions if you have any. One last thing that I want to add is last meeting we mentioned that the Department of Housing and Community Development had sent a letter that it's time to do an update of your subsidized housing inventory. And so that has been submitted. There are several units from one of the Pine Oaks Village developments that needed to be preserved, not units added, but units preserved because their affordability was expiring. And Pine Oaks did refinance in 2017. So we submitted, we're working on submitting additional documents to make sure that those units that were refinanced stay on the SHI.
I'm just concerned in general about, we get so used to the inside game that we kind of forget what the public does and doesn't know about any of this stuff. So can you briefly let everybody know why that occurs? Because they think that you get a 40B, you build something, and we're good to go forever.
Well, briefly. Maybe.
I can help.
Yeah, maybe Charlene can help. It depends on the specific project and where the funding came from for that project.
Right.
So, do you know more
Early
Pine Oaks?
40Bs usually had a shelf life. It could be 10 years, 15 years, 30 years, or what have you. In more recent history, they have become in perpetuity. So there are those 40B developments that are like with Pine Oaks.
Could lapse and go into
too,
the market.
where it lapses and goes on the market. So it used to be every year, now I think it's every 2 years. The SHI, for short, has to be looked at by the towns to make sure that everything is up to date. It's also to make sure that new developments that have been approved are on the list as well, because, you know, we're not all infallible. You know, sometimes they do get missed, and you want to make sure that they're on the list. So that's why we look at it.
And the reason I wanted this brought up in public is because the public is probably on the understanding that this is just cumulative. You build on it, and everything that you've already built gets added to everything that you are building, and we're heading towards 10%. The reality is it could not only go up, it could go down because you lose the eligibility, and it's potentially possible for things that were built a number of years ago to go into market rate and no longer count towards our affordable housing
Exactly.
inventory.
Rental, you know, if it's in perpetuity, that's great. If only 10% is affordable, then we get to count the whole thing. So,
just for clarity, sorry, Larry, go ahead.
The population can go up too.
That's true.
yeah.
So
Got any other good news?
No, I'm just sitting here thinking.
So the Pine Oaks is in perpetuity or not, or
We
do
just
people
asked
need
to
to
renew it.
worry?
I thought, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah.
Mr. Eaton,
Just for clarity for our listeners.
I'm Al Eaton, a member of the Board of Directors of Mid-Cape Church Homes, which is the owner of the Pine Oaks Villages. Pine Oaks Village 1 was refinanced in 2017, and I believe the expiration for that one will be about 2052, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on these numbers. We're seeking the documentation right now to support it. Pine Oaks 2, my understanding was that was renewed in 2009 for 20 years. And that's the one that's in question right now. Because I think in the production plan, it indicates that it's 2018 expiration. But I think it's a 2029, but that's what we're following up on. Pine Oaks 3, I think we're in the 2030s. So we're still rolling along with those, and I don't think any of them are expiring at the moment.
Thank you.
So of course, as part of this project, we're keeping an eye on any units that could be expiring to make sure that we preserve them before that happens. The one category that we have less control over is when it's a home ownership unit, because if the seller, well, we encountered this recently with Gomes. Was it
Gomes Way, yeah.
If the seller wants to sell and you're unable to find a buyer that'll buy at an affordable price, then it can go onto the open market and you lose that affordable unit. But that's not happening right now.
I just wanted the general public to understand the general lay of the land, because we make all sorts of assumptions that they know as much as we do about this stuff, and they basically don't. We're asking them to take a ride with us for the next 6 or 7 months, so I'd like to give them elemental information.
Well, for that matter, it might be helpful to just mention one more thing about the SHI.
Sure.
Because it's coming up. So the subsidized housing inventory is the number of affordable units divided by the number of year-round units. And of course, on the Cape and on the Lower Cape especially,
Where you lose full-time houses.
we have a conversion happening where year-round units are being converted to seasonal units. And so there is a concern, and these numbers are calculated based on the census, which is happening this year. So there is a concern that while most communities in the state will probably have their subsidized housing inventory percentage decrease because population has increased, on the Cape, because of this seasonal dynamic, some communities, particularly on the Outer Cape, might artificially see their subsidized housing inventory percentage increase because the denominator is decreasing. So it's an artificial positive without having
It doesn't
actually
put more people in a
produced
house, let's put
any
it that way.
affordable housing.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just to add a few comments to the discussion here. The Housing Committee put together their famous map that is out there in the hallway, and it shows where all the affordable housing is in Harwich. And one of the things we looked at and we discussed, and I had a meeting with Gregory Winstead, was the comments that just took place here with Pine Oaks 1, 2, and 3. And to my belief, that issue was resolved because, as far as I know, we received the letter, and the letter was transmitted to, at the time, the current town planner, stating that they were going through some financing, and that was the reason it kind of kicked it out of, momentarily, out of the affordable housing stock, but it never really was out of it, but technically it was, and then now it's back in. It was just one of these paper things. So there should be a document in the office somewhere.
But it still has a lifetime. It's not in perpetuity. When they refinanced, it refinanced so that, you know, for the purposes of staying under the SHI qualifications, but it does have an end date. Doesn't mean it can't be extended once again after that, but it's not in perpetuity.
Okay, well, okay, I'll stand on that. I wasn't aware that they added another end date. I thought it would, because
End date.
at least the message I got from Mr. Winstead was that it's going to stay affordable forever.
Yeah, generally.
So,
Yeah, but you're
okay.
talking two different things. It's,
Well-
us getting credit for being
Right.
affordable is different
Exactly.
from their intention to keep it affordable.
Right, so both have to, you know, be
Yeah.
Yeah.
that was it. So, but, okay, now going back to the list there are X number of properties that are considered affordable, and they have an end date, and they came under different programs over the years that were basically rehab programs, that the owners received a grant for X number of years, and some of now, they're outside the end
They've
date.
come off the list.
Yeah.
So they'll come off but my understanding is, as long as they don't come up for sale, the only thing that's going to trigger them dropping off really is if the owner, when they sell. And if there's something I don't think we can really do anything about it, because it was a grant program. I don't think we can now go back and say, oh, we're going to extend that to in perpetuity. I think those are going to have to fall by the wayside. I don't know. I'm not a legal person on this, so.
Andre?
That's correct. They are falling off. So those are actually units that received community development block grant funds through the town, subcontracted to actually a community development partnership who runs this housing rehab program. And the reason why it's a fixed term, a fixed length of time that they're on the SHI, is because they're only eligible while that, it's a loan. It's a housing rehab modification loan program while that loan is active, and it's a 15-year forgivable loan. So as long as the owner remains in their home as a primary residence, that loan is effectively paid off without the owner paying anything, 1/15 per year. And so when that 15-year term ends, they come off our SHI.
Well, the dates are on there, so the dates are when the 15-year comes up. So a few have already gone past that. Some were actually, I think one was in 18, and I think there's a couple this year, and it goes up further. And I think all told, I think there's like 9 units. So I think we're going to be losing those, but that's that. Thank you.
And going back to what Al had said, it was, even if the thing did say 29 in the interim, trying to find that, we're far better off accounting for the worst-case scenario and asking for the renewal as if it were 19, which we have done. I mean, those papers have been submitted.
We're pursuing those.
So that's a discussion for another day, but at least you're covered in the event that was the accurate date. Okay, any other agenda-building things?
Can I ask
Yeah.
something? Remind us again when you are retiring?
July,
July. Is there some way that
Of what year?
the current.
Is there some way that we, as a body, an entity, can formally request the Board of Selectmen to consider hiring or putting out, whatever the process is for.
There's a process in place right now,
Oh,
being discussed and figured out.
okay. That's all I wanted to say, to have
all I can
somebody
say.
come on sooner rather than later so that they can work with Charlene for not just a few weeks, but maybe a couple of months or
I think
whatever.
this succession discussion in general has been coming up about how to,
Yeah.
how to
It's not being
account for
ignored.
the discontinued service, which
Thank
doesn't
you.
serve the town all that well.
Thank you.
You're still on agenda building here. Brendan. Larry, you have anything you burning desire to have on here?
I have no other business, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay. So our next meeting's January 27th? Not
20th
27th,
is a regular schedule,
But we,
unless we need to reschedule
or
to
February. No.
include Jennifer Goldson.
Okay, and we have the agenda items that we want to.
do you
Yeah,
want
and-
Do it now,
to discuss
schedule-
changing it?
Yeah, you
I,
wanna
I wouldn't mind, because I have kids too. And
do you want to just go to the next Thursday,
the
on
fall-
the 27th?
if that would be.
February?
Yes.
I will just be coming out of anesthesia at that point. No. There'll be those, on the other hand, that would say, how would we know the difference?
So
Or the
no on the
week-
27th? So
Or the 13th, or is that too soon?
I won't be here on the 13th, but you don't necessarily need me here on the 13th.
Those, actually, would just follow-on discussions, if you're okay with missing that, I think,
It's okay with me.
how
by
about,
me.
how about the agenda people?
13th is good for you, yeah.
We'd have to reach out to Laura, but I'm inclined to do it the 13th, even if that weren't the case for Laura, and defer her presentation to the next one.
At 2 o'clock?
Yeah,
Thank you.
13th at 2.
Good.
2.
2 o'clock.
My mother will thank you. Go to visit.
I mean, just to be explicit, the object is to get something done as opposed to let's see how many things we can talk about.
Right. Absolutely.
So, all right, any comments from the audience? Hearing none, we are adjourned.
2 o'clock on.
Go easy with the